I got involved in Maurice in a chain of rather wonderful circumstances. I'd known Jim and Ismail from Room with a View. We'd been hanging around on set because my then brother-in-law, Julian Sands, was obviously playing the lead opposite Helena Bonham Carter. And we started to talk about Maurice, which Jim Ivory had always wanted to do as the sort of second movement of the symphony, the Forster three-part sequence that he did. He came to me because Ruth Pravajabvala, their normal collaborator and genius, was working on a novel at the time and didn't really feel that Maurice was naturally her territory. I, by contrast, who was working at the BBC as a music and arts producer, was dragooned on, I suppose, because of luck. I had happened to have gone to Forster's school, Tunbridge, which he disliked, I rather enjoyed. I'd been to Forster's University. And I came from the same kind of background, the sort of southeastern, prosperous middle class, I suppose. So I suppose Jim felt that I would know the background to it all and how the class system worked, how the course worked. And so suddenly found myself in upstate New York working on the film script with him. And we very quickly adapted the script around the kitchen table. Jim and I were working together because time was of the absolute essence. We only had 3 months. But I had been to Cambridge and studied Forster. I knew the book quite well, so my initial task for him was to extrapolate the scenes, the main scenario of the piece. We then sat down at a kitchen table and started turning that scenario into something that was realizable in cinematographic terms, which was very much more Jim's input. Most of the dialogue actually is lifted straight from Forster, particularly some of the really stunning lines.
England has always been disinclined to accept human nature.
The great thing about Forster's dialogue is that it is written almost as screen dialogue. It is wonderfully precise. All the nuances, all the allusions are there. It's a question of trimming and extrapolating the plot. So a lot of those ring absolutely pure, and you can transmute them at once.
I'm thankful that it was into your hands I fell. Most men would have reported me to the Dean or the police.
The whole process of writing the screenplay was so hurried that the casting was fairly quickly achieved. I think we had about 3 months from green light to first day of shooting.
I think I was doing review comedy at the time and had rather lost interest in formal acting, proper acting. But some agents came up and said, hey baby, we can make you a star. And the reason they said that is because there was then a great fashion for posh films like Brideshead and Chariots of Fire. So I said, no, thank you, that's not my bag. And then I went home and thought, actually, maybe that would be fun for a year, and then I'll go and do my other degree.
He and I had known each other from university days. I'd known him from the comedy circuit, oddly enough, in London. We both had cabaret acts. His dazzlingly funny, and we'd shared digs, we'd shared theatres, we'd shared beds, I think, at one point when times were hard.
My agent, who very seldom telephoned and said, there's this film Merchant Ivory are doing and they'd like to meet you. I really thought about, I don't know if I want to go for this, it seems rather serious and I won't get it. And my brother, who was a banker, who I was living with at the time, was at home that day ill, and he said, no, come on, don't be an arse. Go and make an effort and brush your hair and wear a suit.
And so when Jim was given by Celestia Fox, the casting director, a list of 6 virtually unknown young British actors, because they are all very young and they wouldn't have established a reputation, the 3 main leads, I said, well, cast Huey, he'll make us laugh.
And I met James Ivory and he felt I was right for him.
I went for a sort of general casting, I guess, with Jim Ivory, and they'd already cast Maurice, another actor playing Maurice. And he says he remembers saying, I can't have him in the film, meaning me, because he looks too much like the actor they'd already cast.
The actor who was slotted in for Maurice became unavailable at the last minute, and so we had to find James Wilby very quickly, and what a miracle that we did.
I suppose his mind went back to who was that tall blonde actor that I didn't want in the film. And so I got recalled. This is a month later.
He was performing in a piece in the Chichester Festival Theatre.
And I also knew Hugh, because Hugh Grant was in this film, Privileged. Privileged was a film set in Oxford and made by Oxford students entirely, undergraduates.
When I was at Oxford, one of the things I did, I mean, I was studying English, but there was this guy called Mike Hoffman who wanted to make a film, a sort of low-budget film, and I agreed to act in it mainly because there was a girl in it called Victoria Studd who I really fancied. So I was in that, and then there were various non-Oxford actors who were brought in.
I went to Durham University, and one of the guy who directed it had one of his ex-girlfriends was at RADA with me, and that's how I got involved. They found it difficult to cast this particular role, and I happened to be playing tennis with him one day at her house, and that was the introduction to him that I needed.
And he came in and played a guy who was sort of thrown about on the horns of love. I just remember he was in love with this girl, and his line was, "I gave her roses. I gave her roses." So that's when I first met him.
So I phoned Hugh, didn't tell Jim this, and the night before our meeting, and of course I think Hugh was really pleased with the idea he could be acting with somebody he knew.
And I said, well, come round. So he came round to my house in Shepherd's Bush, and we rehearsed.
So we worked the scenes to death the night before the audition, and that's a huge advantage.
I remember that being a surprise to my banker brother when he came home and found me kissing James Wilby in the front room, and it helped. The audition, he got it.
We want tea! We need tea! We demand tea! Hello, Durham!
The casting was very, very quickly put together. It had to be. Rupert, I think, was in James's mind from the start.
I got involved in Maurice because I'd just done A Room with a View with James, and I hadn't read Maurice at all, but he obviously knew he wanted to do it, and he asked me if I'd like to do it. I was very insecure when I'd done Room with a View because it was my first film, and I remember going out to James afterwards and saying, "I'm really sorry for that really god-awful performance." And he said, no, it's fine, it's good, it's all right, it's okay, don't worry. And then the next week, I think he asked me to do Maurice, which made me feel better then.
What's your name?
Scudder, man.
There was no rehearsal period prior to the film, zero. I was working in the theatre in Chichester, doing a season of plays at the Chichester Festival Theatre. And I finished on Saturday night at Chichester, drove up to London. We had a read-through in the afternoon, followed by a second read-through on the Sunday, and we started shooting on the Monday. So that was my preparation, and I'm quite glad, on reflection, that I didn't have any time to sit and get frightened. You know, and also all my acting muscles were alive. You know, if you haven't done something for a few months or a few weeks even, especially when you're a younger actor, your acting muscles are slightly rusty, and your inhibitions are back. Because the more you act, when you're in the middle of acting something, all inhibitions are just gone.
But what research did I do? Well, I think I was just general panic. I sat there with the script for months and months and did probably much too much working out of backstory and stuff like that. I remember having pages and pages of notes, which is a bad thing. You become too kind of cerebral about the whole thing.
First of all, I didn't really know how films worked. It was only my second film, and I hadn't been to drama school or anything, so I had no real. I was basking it really. So I just tried to be truthful in the scenes and left the way the character imposes himself on the story up to the editing. If you start a play, you rehearse the whole thing and then you present the whole thing as a picture. In a film and on TV, and you start with little disparate bits and bobs without really rehearsing fully. It's not until you really speak and you move as a character do you know what the character's like, really.
I'm sure, sir, I'm very sorry if I failed to give you and Mr. London full satisfaction, sir.
That's all right, Scudder.
I did a fair amount of research for Maurice. I remember I went down to... I based the kind of accent... I come from the West Country myself, but I based the accent in Wiltshire. And I went round a few old... I went round to the old guys and taped their voices. And kind of got the accent from there. And then I read a lot of E.M. Forster stuff. And then I started reading about Edwardian agriculture in England. And not that it really helped me at all, but it kind of put me in the frame of mind and in the mood.
Research into the character was almost 90%, 95% the book. When Forster said, I picked as my hero a man who was mentally torpid, into which I dropped the ingredient that he's homosexual, which wakens his mind up. So I found that a really interesting idea, and He feels intellectually inferior to most of the other characters in the piece. So there's a sort of, oh Christ, a clunk before he tentatively suggests what he's thinking. And I wanted to try and chart through the movie, because it is about self-discovery, this film, that as he gets older and more confident, he's able to use his own emotions and his own understanding of the world more confidently, and doesn't have a clunk, which he has at the beginning. There's a huge shyness in him at the beginning. Doesn't know who he is, where he is, what it's all about. I'm not saying he does by the end, but he has a much clearer understanding by the end.
And I do beg you to resist the return of this obsession.
I don't need advice. I'm flesh and blood, Clive, if you'll condescend to such low things.
I imagine that the crucial scenes in Maurice Hall's journey, if one's plotting the thing in chapters, are initially the scene in the Dean's study where he first meets Risley and is alerted to an undercurrent he's only dimly been aware of and has felt was his own private subconscious before then. He realises there are other people out there. There is Clive's declaration of love and his initial horror and recoiling from it. Then there is his own declaration of love when he bands up the ivy of the college wall and climbs into Clive's room.
I love you. I love you.
And then there is Clive's rejection of him, which is the absolute turning point in the first section of the film.
We've got to change, you and I.
Can the leopard change his spots?
And there we have the two journeys. The one, Clive Durham, is not prepared to embrace homosexuality. So he is going to go on a conventional life, marry a girl, have some sort of wretched marriage, some children perhaps, and be in the closet.
Whatever genuine homosexual urges he may or may not have had, he may have had, he represses successfully in the latter part of the film and becomes this tremendously boring and evangelical about the joys of marriage.
It's the greatest thing on earth. Perhaps the only one.
Forster's explanation, which is somewhat unsatisfactory, we both felt, is that Clive goes off to Greece and experiences a change of sexuality and temperament. Forster himself even sounds unconvinced by this explanation. His normal wit and his sagesse and his wisdom deserts him in those chapters. But he obviously needed as a plot device, as we needed as a plot device, Clive and Maurice's paths to diverge. But we needed, I think, to show the late 20th century audience how urgent the threat was to Maurice and particularly to Clive, because Clive, being gentry and in a position of authority, is in a position of extreme danger of exposure.
By continuing like this, you and I are risking everything we have. Our careers, our families, our names.
Balls. I don't give a damn about name.
The whole book is E.M. Forster dissecting the miseries of what it was like to be gay in the Edwardian world, and it must have been absolutely miserable for those guys.
A world where homosexuality and love between men, active love between men, was a punishable, imprisonable offence, which quite frequently happened in Edwardian England.
In sentencing you to 6 months imprisonment with hard labour.
It seems incomprehensible to today's audience that somebody could actually be imprisoned for that, but we had to make that more urgent than perhaps Forster did. So we set up Lord Risley and invented this whole scandal around him.
Viscount Risley commits suicide. Dies by his own hand.
And also, we had to alert the film audience to what Maurice is expected to know, i.e. the Athenian Greeks, the Anglican tenets of Christian faith, those two huge cornerstones on which Western civilization, particularly British civilization, was based, and on which empire and the whole class system and the whole flower of England was based, and the huge hypocrisy and the shoving under the rug that Edwardian society managed to achieve with Plato.
Which Zeus, in love with Ganymede, called the stream of longing.
Omit the reference to the unspeakable vice of the Greeks.
Omit the unspeakable vice of the Greeks, and you omit the mainstay of Athenian society, 5th century Athenian society. An enormous part of it was based on the love between two men. And, of course, that's directly incompatible with the Anglican faith. So these two things were pitted against each other, as Clive angrily says in The Punt.
A masculine love of physical beauty and of moral beauty and of the beauty of the thirst for human knowledge. You omit that, and you've omitted the mainstay of Athenian society.
He is alert to the hypocrisy. Maurice is only awakened to it by Clive and realises that there's a huge hole in the argument. But we couldn't assume that our cinema audience would either know Plato's Symposium or would know actually what the Christian faith which Maurice rejects and which Forster makes a big fuss of. So we had to feed that in as much as possible.
Your father always went to church?
I can't help it, Mother. I'm made that way. It's no use arguing.
He wasn't just breaking down the barriers of sexual oppression and persecution because of sexuality, but also because of class. Maurice's huge transgression is not so much that he has an affair with a man. It's tacitly there throughout the book, and there are many, many characters in the book who know what exactly what is going on, and probably have been through the same thing themselves. We hint at it with Simcox the butler.
Mr. Hall's a gentleman.
And with a character who got lost in the final cut, but is Dr. Barry's nephew, to whom Maurice makes overtures, and is played beautifully by Adrian Ross Magenti. We were sorry to lose that.
Above, in the attic over this. If you want anything, I'm all night alone. I always am.
But Maurice's great sin is to go off with a working class boy.
There are always class issues in Forster's novels. I mean, you can't avoid it in that particular period of our history. The middle class Maurice, when he goes to stay with the upper class Durhams, is accepted, but I think he's accepted under suffering.
Welcome to Pendersley, Mr. Hall.
How do you do?
Woolly?
And I think Forster wanted, in his quietly radical way, for all that oppression to be swept away. And I think Maurice, in its quiet way, did an awful lot to pull the rug out from all that carapace of oppression.
I imagine that Maurice was attracted to Scudder because, unlike a lot of people of his class and a lot of people that he went to university with, he probably had just a little, I suppose, earthiness is the word, and truth and honesty.
And I'm not saying it's that he wants a bit of rough. I just think the character of Scudder seems to be this wholehearted, fantastic animal.
The groundwork is all laid for him. There's the whole episode of the Boys' Club, the mission in the East End, where public school boys, who are the independently educated schoolboys in Britain, went to help those less fortunate themselves. And there's a very homoerotic scene where Maurice is watching them shower after a boxing match, and you just get that yawning chasm of the class divide suddenly opening up for the first time. So there are Scudder prototypes in the film, working class boys he's attracted to, as indeed was E.M. Forster and his mentor Edward Carpenter. From then on, the chapters revolve around Scudder far more.
And it's extraordinary the way it's described in the book. It's these little chance meetings, and we try and recapture that in the film, but in not quite so many chance meetings.
He just creeps into the original Forster as this little figure in the background, and you only gradually become aware of him. If, however, you get an actor as striking as Rupert Graves lurking in the back of shot, your antennae go up at once. Simply because I think a film can tell you so very much more and give so much more away, in a sense, than a book can. Give a good actor a close-up, or two good actors a close-up, and an awful lot of the surprise is given away in advance. So you have very carefully to construct how you let out the line before you bring the fish in.
So you're calling to me, sir? I know, sir.
The decision Maurice takes at the end of the movie to embrace homosexuality is the great thing that he does. He becomes a human being, and he's prepared to fight the bigoted Edwardian society, which sent Oscar Wilde to jail and Risley to jail.
The story of Maurice, from my point of view, is an important one. Not only does it tell us a lot about Forster, it tells us a great deal about very human characters in a predicament where society is pitted against them. But it tells, I think, because it has a happy ending. It was possibly one of the very first of the films of the late 20th century where two gay people were allowed to go off into the sunset together hand in hand and be happy. So the story of Maurice is about boy meets boy loses boy finds another boy and falls in love and is happy ever after. an ending which even Forster himself doubted, but which he hoped for. He said, you know, dedicate this to a better Britain.
So yes, it's a huge triumph of spirit.
Now we shall never be parted. It's finished.
It was by far and away the best acting job I'd ever been offered, and so it never even came into it, never even occurred to me to think twice about it. And even if it had, it wouldn't. I don't think it would have bothered me, the homosexual aspect.
I just thought I'm going to approach it as a sexual being, whether it was heterosexual or homosexual didn't make any difference to me at all. One of the great things about being an actor is that you can you get the opportunity to visit all parts of your character, which you prohibit normally. Like a character like Scudder is, I'm not saying that everybody's latently gay or I'm latently gay or anything, but there is a part of me as a human being. I can imagine being somebody attracted to a man. There's a thing called the magic if in acting, which you say, I'm not gay, but if I was gay, and it's a magic if because it opens up doors that you there to inhibit and prohibit yourself from things that you don't want to do. I think the kind of the interesting thing about Scudder is that he's quite at ease with who he is and his sexuality within the film, in the story.
Come on, let's give over talking. Here. Stop with me, sleep the night with me.
That seemed to me that was the most important part of his character for me. It wasn't where he put his dick, it's what he kind of how happy he was with it and where he put it.
Not being homosexual, there was a pressure having to play a homosexual. The scene at the end of the film where the characters of Scudder and Maurice come together and kiss, we shot on the 4th day, on the Thursday. We started shooting on the Monday, we were going to shoot this on the Thursday, and I hardly knew Rupert, you know. We went out for dinner the night before, ostensibly to discuss this kiss, what we were going to do, what kind of kiss it should be, and we talked about everything else under the sun. We decided to have a curry as well, which made me laugh.
We went out for a meal with James Ivory and James Wilby and I went out and we discussed what we were going to do.
We kept coming back to it and sort of and then going off onto some other topic.
It was a long and frank discussion of sexuality. But I don't remember much. I don't remember oral sex coming up an awful lot. I mean, I think we're describing, being asked really what we were prepared to do as actors.
He swears it was him, but I swear it was me. I just said, anyway, the kids, I think we should just go for it. He went, yeah, so do I. Although he swears it was the other way around. And the next day, that's exactly what we did, with no shame and just got on with it. And thank God, because it gives the end of the film a real resonance. There was another scene with him naked in bed, and we were nervous. And it's the first nude scene I'd ever done on film, and I'm doing it with another man on the last rehearsal, just before the first take. The bed collapsed. I don't know why. And Pierre Lhomme, the French cameraman, oh, what a man! And everybody laughed. Because, here we are, hard-nosed British crew in a small room with two naked men in bed. It was a sort of tense moment on the set. Thank God we had a Frenchman there who was able to, get some normality back into the moment. And I ate that the scene then went fine.
You paid for this room in advance, didn't you? I mean, they won't stop me downstairs or anything.
You'll be all right.
Well, Jim's method of directing is to leave a phenomenal amount up to the actor.
James is beautifully trusting of actors. He always says that he believes that an actor knows more about his character than he does.
So he won't say, do that, take faster. He'll say, I kind of like the way you do that thing with your eyebrow, and then the way you say your line,
His great note is, he says, well, I don't like the way you're doing that, do that differently. So you have to come up with something different. He's not putting on exactly the right, on the right line, his line. He's wanting it to come from you, always wanting it to come from you. And he's got fantastic taste. So when he doesn't like something, which is often, and he's got a great hatred of anything that smacks of acting. You know, he's on all these films with British actors who, if they're allowed, I remember Billy Whitelaw, him saying, I'm sorry, but you're all just acting too much. And she went, well, that's what we like to do. She kind of, you know, and we realised that it was time to take it down a bit. He's wonderful at creating an environment where people discuss and talk, and through that, opinions begin to be formed.
What's incredible with the hands-off attitude he has, how much a Merchant Ivory film is a Merchant Ivory film, because it looks people are playing in the same film, whereas sometimes if directors don't impose their personality or the film's personality onto the actor at the time of filming, you can end up with people looking like they're in different films, but that doesn't happen in Merchant Ivory films.
Jim was the last director I remember who worked without a monitor, who actually loitered by the side of the camera. To this day, when I'm filming, I still expect to see his head loom up somewhere in the murk behind the camera. And the other thing about Jim's style of directing was that I think it was, as I recall, it was very visual. Every note he gave you was as though it was a note about how you looked or how the shot looked, and you'd have to translate it back into a normal acting note, because I think he started life as an art director, and that is a key element in his filmmaking, I think, is the look.
Maurice is part of a triptych. It's kind of like the middle section of the three-part adaptations of Forster that Merchant Ivory worked on. And so there was already a house style somewhat established with Room with a View. It's a much darker piece than Room with a View. Howard's End combines the darkness with the light of Room with a View. But Maurice is a very dark, sombre, masculine piece, which I think Jim captured superbly with Pierre Lhomme, the photographer, in the autumnal setting, in the decay of Pendersley, in those dark, masculine wooden interiors, the black and white suits, the subfusk of Cambridge. So there was certainly a visual style to match.
The first time I saw it in public was at the Venice Film Festival. And I remember saying to Jim, what's the form? He said, well, at the end of the film, if they like it, they'll applaud, and we should stand up and nod graciously. And if they don't like it, they won't. And that was just in my head. And at the end of the film, they started to applaud. And very unlike being in the theatre, which was my experience of applause, up until that moment, you know, you get quite a loud, instant applause, 2 or 3 curtain calls, and it fades to nothing. But this was more like the opera, where it starts, you know, fine, and then it carries on, and then it starts to build, and then we stood up and we nodded graciously, and it carried on, and it must have gone on for 5 minutes, which is a hell of a long time to nod graciously, I tell you. It was also one of the proudest moments of my life, standing next to James Ivory at the Venice Film Festival, nodding graciously. It was an immensely warm reception. The film did very well there. We won a Silver Lion. Hugh and I shared the Best Actor award. We won a music award. And, you know, you felt the film was off to a fantastic launch.
After I did Maurice, a lot of people assumed that I was gay. And I got an awful lot of letters from people, and some really extraordinary letters from people who I think the film helped an awful lot of people. I got letters from people who were in prison, and they said they were in prison because they were confused and they didn't realise that they were gay, and after seeing the film they kind of realised it was all right. And an extraordinary number of very honest and letters from people who had been through an awful lot of pain and torment.
I had a huge amount of letters from, I suppose, homosexuals in the closet who said that the film gave them the inspiration to come out and be open about it.
And I don't know if the film necessarily helped them, but it certainly calmed their worries about themselves.
Both in America and certainly here, because we'd had Margaret Thatcher and her Clause 28, which had banned the promotion of homosexuality in schools and local councils, etc. And I suppose there was a slight little wave of homophobic behaviour just as the film came out, which I'm sure affected it here, and a little bit in the States too. I mean, we're talking 15 years ago this film came out. Other than that, we had fantastic. The New York Times was extraordinary. Played for a year in Paris, a year. So it sort of had a worldwide appeal.
And also a lot of Japanese girls too like the film.
I've had thousands of letters from Japanese schoolgirls I think there must be a class in Japan where they say to practice your English you have to write a fan letter, because you wouldn't believe how many letters, and Hugh Grant says the same.
I think they're like three pretty boys running around. Probably. And it's a beautiful, I mean, it is a beautiful story. It's a beautiful story.